As a designer, I think you do what's in your DNA,
right,
and it starts to evolve. And there was something about the possibility of going in as a group, and it was community theater early on, but going into a room and the possibility of storytelling, of making, of crafting, that was seductive to me and felt like a way, what it really felt like was a way to mediate the world, a way to understand the world.
But does this mean you thought about maybe doing something other than a scenic designer, like being an actor or a director?
No, no, although my mom was a choreographer.
Right. In Deal, New Jersey, or
in
where?
Deal, New Jersey, yeah. She helped found the Community Players, which is right out of Waiting for Guffman. But, and then I saw my first Broadway show, which was Fiddler on the Roof. What I've figured out is, and what I didn't expect is, the interest in theater, which is an interest in choreography and movement and storytelling that influenced the architecture for 28, 29 years, was intersecting with the work I was doing in theater that I was looking at from an architectural point of view. So they've intersected in a way that is surprising and kind of thrilling.
So now you are being recognized for your work in theater, which got to thrill you. I mean, all the other things you've done, but this is back first love.
Yeah.
How do you approach it? I mean, the people from Lucky Guys come to you, Lucky Guy, and say, this is the play. These are the characters. Help us create a place to tell our story.
Well, it starts with, in the case of Lucky Guy, it was Nora Ephron's final piece, and I know you've had a lot of conversation here about that. And when George C. Wolfe, who is an extraordinary artist, invited me on board, I jumped at the opportunity. And here's as a designer and as the set designer, what you realize is you're part of telling that story.
Right.
And in fact, in the case of Lucky Guy, it's 41 scenes. The last thing you could do is slow down for a big permanent piece of scenery. So part of the journey was figuring out how to, first of all, what's the world? What's the believable world?
Right.
In that case, it was 1985, love of tabloid journalism.
Right.
And when you look at all those newsrooms, there were only two.
And New York City.
And New York City, which was a very messy, vital kind of place. And I came to New York in '79.
Yeah.
So that was when I fell in love with the city. So the play needs to move as quickly as it can, and so there's portable desks, there's clutter on the desks, and then there's an overhead ceiling where, with George and with a great collaborative team of lighting designers and projection designers, it tells a story in movement through image and through fragment, and it was just thrilling to work on that.
In the end, though, and let me ask you this, notwithstanding what you do, and understanding clearly that sets make a good big contribution, but in the end, bottom line, it's actors moving around on a stage, on a bare stage, right?
Well, of course, it's humbling to realize you don't have that much control over the success, and it's part of how I choose what projects to work on, is since you have no say really in the outcome.
Right.
You're picking those journeys you want to be on, and so much of my studio's work is thinking about how a piece of theater or a restaurant or a hotel or an object makes a connection with someone and how it makes an emotional connection. That's how you choose it, because in fact, one story I remember on Lucky Guy, there was a scene in a restaurant. And if there was one scene I thought I could contribute to, it would be the design of this restaurant scene.
Right.
So we built the banquette, and the actors couldn't relate. George kept saying, the banquette's too small. And I said, the banquette is 8 feet wide. Any bigger, it would be a barge. Ultimately, the success of that scene depended on realizing we didn't need a banquette. We needed 2 chairs and an ashtray and an image, because it was slowing down the process of
and
the
that's
play.
also what you see now in terms of theaters is screens at the background, all that kind of stuff, which can give you something. That's more one-man one-woman shows than it is anything
And
else.
it can be, and that can be overused too. I think it can become just a
crutch
slideshow.
almost, a crutch.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. But and the other interesting thing is the power of light.
Yeah.
Yes.
No question about that. Lighting was in fact early on in restaurant design for me the thing that fascinated me the most, because it could set mood, it could set character. In theater, it is the ultimate collaboration. In the design of Kinky Boots, the surrounding wall is all about how it takes light. It's crafted like a factory where everything feels real and tangible, but it takes light.
I must see a scene from that. Tell me what the story of Kinky Boots is, so then they'll see the set and understand it.
Well, Kinky Boots can only happen in a musical, a very unlikely story of a third-generation kid in northern England who inherits a shoe factory. He doesn't want to inherit the shoe factory. He wants to do other things. Cut to a drag queen in London who has issues with his dad, as Charlie Price, the kid in the shoe factory, has with their dad, his dad. And he reinvents the factory with Lola, the drag queen from London. And so much of what I felt I needed to do was give that a real a reason to be. And there was one central idea. I think most design that has a central idea is stronger. And that was every piece of the set in Kinky Boots is used in some other way. So the conveyor belts become a big production number. The shoe racks move back and forth to create a kind of magic transition. So it is essentially one unit set that's very real, that's about craftsmanship, which was our link to the narrative of what Charlie was doing in that factory.
All right, take a look here, roll tape. This is a video clip that gives you a sense of the set design for Kinky Boots.
Price & Son spent the last century making a range of shoes for men. We will begin this century making a range of shoes for a range of men.
That shows you behind the sort of the look. It is the whole mechanics of the whole thing, always, right?
Yeah, and at the end of the day, there's the love of making, and I think that's another important thing in my work, is you have to love making the thing.
What is the craft of set design?
Well, remember, I come to set design after 15 years as an architect and developing that craft. So I came to it with a toolbox of being able to model, being able to understand space, understanding materiality. What theater introduced to me, and I think, in fact, it brings it to our architecture projects, is a understanding of portability, an understanding of flexibility, the interest in crafting the moment. I think in theater it's about these things that last 2 hours have deep, deep impact on us. And I think the designer, it's a kind of poetry in that, there can be 90 pages of words, but the set has to encapsulate that in a series of fragments and pieces that move and support the story. So it's a complicated question, and I think every designer brings their own point of view. And architects from early 20th century were very obsessed and focused with theater and portability and movement. So I think my way in is an architect first, and as a set designer secondly.
And what's the perfect director to collaborate
That's a great question. Well, there are directors who are prescriptive, so they'll tell you exactly what to do, which in some ways edits the creative process. And there's directors who will leave it all to you. I think the best director is someone who really wants to engage, wants to spend time working with you. I remember the very first design presentation for Hairspray to Jack O'Brien. Since it was my second Broadway musical, you can imagine I had drawn every moment of the show before this presentation. So I had a room full of boards and models and images, and he came in and looked at it and then put his arm around me. And he said, let's take everything out except for those things that make you really fall in love with Tracy Turnblad and look at the world from her point of view. That's a great director.
When you look at the doing of this, and all that it entails, I mean, and all the things that you have done, I'm reminded of what an architect said to me once, a famous architect. He said, I want a client who knows what they want, but trust me to surprise them.
That's a great line. And a seminal Broadway designer, Boris Aronson, who designed Fiddler on the Roof, was known for, in all the great productions with Hal Prince talks about on Cabaret, that the rippled mirror, which was such an important part of that set, was a surprise when they got into the theater. Wow. Yeah, I want a client who knows what they want but doesn't know what they want it to look like. Yeah. I want a client who wants to take some creative risks. I think that's been something we've tried to build into our studio, is not being afraid to stay curious and not be defined by one type of work, I guess.
And who do you consider the client?
Well, in a theater project, the client is the director. You're interested in serving the writer, but the client is the director. There's no question about it.
TED Conference, you have spoken at.
Yep.
It's a famous venue to learn and to hear, with huge demands on the speaker because you have time limit, and you have a history of people who have performed well under great pressure. So you redesigned, or you designed, this TED Theater in Vancouver, where they're going to have the 30th anniversary.
Yep.
What went into that?
It's a kind of dream project. So I've been involved with TED for, I think, 15 years, and a long time. I spoke at Monterey, which was a thrust. So the audience was surrounded. It was much smaller than Long Beach. And then they moved to Long Beach, which is, I think, 2,000 people, so it's a very big theater. And it was great, and production values got better. And I have spoken there and have had that experience of your talk is influenced by how you feel in the room. Like, you know, the environment affects how the talk evolves. And so when Chris called me and said they were moving
Chris
to
Anderson.
Chris Anderson, who has taken over the TED Conference from Richard Werman and done an amazing job, said they're going to Vancouver, and could I create a temporal pop-up theater in this place in Vancouver? And it was as if someone, I couldn't have picked a more ideal project, because TED is a combination of theater and festival, right? It happens over many days. So we're creating from scratch a theater designed around a talk, like going back to the roots of theater. And no one's ever done a theater that's solely based on a talk, so that things like how an audience sits in the theater. Well, if you're going to be there for 3 or 4 days, some talks you may want to recline, some talks you may want to lean.
Right.
So there's 10 different ways to inhabit this theater, and we're working with Steelcase and actually developing custom furniture.
Right.
And the other thing that's fascinating about it is I'm convinced when you watch a TED Talk or any televised presentation, that relationship between the audience and the performer affects how the show comes across. So here, this speaker, the one doing the presentation, will be surrounded by an audience.
Yeah, right. I mean, I have made speeches all over the world, and if the worst thing I hate and fear the most, if there is, you're on some big stage and the people are so far away from you,
Yeah,
you feel
it's like a moat.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you feel like you can't feel them, you can't smell them, you can't hear them, you can't touch them, you can't feel their energy.
Yeah.
You know. And if it's the reverse, if you're in where they are, and they are with you, you know, it just builds and enforces and pushes and makes you, you know, respond with their energy and give them more, and then they'll give you more.
And when you're designing a space that's going to be used for 3 days, all day long of conferences, creating a room in which you can feel that connection. So
go ahead. Let me show you this. We got some video here. You gave us this. Here's an animation. This is animation, folks.
So this is showing the sequence of how this will be set up over 4 or 5 days. It's a 24-foot diameter speaker stage. Yeah. Here you're seeing the scaffolding for the seating. Yeah. And you're seeing the tiered seating, the upper ring, which will allow people to stand and perch. Right. And you're seeing the seating.
Now, how many people will sit in here?
1,200 about.
Right. Okay.
And one of the most interesting things is the entrance is, of course, critical, right? How you build anticipation. So this takes you through one of the entrances. The structure is wood. And here you're getting a sense of what it will feel like to be a speaker, looking back at those 1,200 seats with the ringside seats.
Yeah.
Ringside seats were interesting because one of the things Chris asked for us to explore was trading seat width for seat depth. Right. So when you go to a theater, you know, you feel all crammed in. Here, we're having some seats where you can really get comfortable in them.
Okay. That's what, in 2014, March?
I think it's late February, early March.
Right. Okay. Yep. The next thing we're going to see is an animation showing the reconfigurable workspace that Rockwell, that you designed for Cornell Tech. This is the Graduate School of Applied Sciences. Roll tape. Let's take a look at that too. There's an animation as well.
So Cornell Tech is coming to Roosevelt Island with an incredible campus. I think 2017.
Yeah. They won a big contest to create.
Yeah, if we can just freeze that for 1 second, what we're looking at is multiple pieces. Think of it as a kit of parts. It's going in Google's offices, so Cornell is taking space there. Right. In Cornell Tech, the students will be able to reconfigure this kit of parts. Things fold out. Every surface is writable, so that the same space, and we're also doing something that's really a request from Cornell Tech, which is building in sensing. So when they build their full campus, they'll have the information about exactly how students move and use these pieces. So
sensors will record that? Is that the idea?
Yeah. And it looks at something that really is, again, intersection of theater and architecture, I think, and that is that how we work is changing. We don't just do work in a solitary cubicle or meet in a communal conference. If you think about the streets of New York where there's an accidental encounter, that's happening in office spaces too. So this is being designed to accommodate those 3 or 4 fixed modes we know about, but I think more significantly all the things that will allow students and real-world professionals who will invite in to reconfigure it.
Are 3D printers going to have an impact on your work?
They already are.
Really?
In a huge way.
How so?
Well, we're able to treat spaces like sculpture in a much quicker way. We're able to visualize things. We're able to show clients a much greater variety. We're able to explore what things will look like in process. So it's changing everything.
Yeah. And can you imagine, I mean, it hasn't been that long that we've had all these elements. You know, the visualizations that you can do now because of a computer screen. Yeah. You know, and you can see and change and adapt, and you know, it's an amazing kind of transformation. It's like brain surgeons now have the kind of imaging that they have.
Yeah, it clearly gives you more power. When you finish a project, the ultimate transition as an architect or designer is when you turn that client over when you turn that project over to the client, and then they take it and do what they want to do with it, that's when you have to let it go. So you can exercise all that control up until the point where you turn it over.
So your core competence is?
Well, I'm not sure I'm wired to think core competence, but I think core passion
Right.
is finding ways that design creates interesting emotional connections. And it's why in a restaurant, the chef is the script. You're working with a chef and you're getting their point of view. They're telling you what they want. And then you're creating a place where customers are going to come in and experience that. That's true in a playground. It's true in a park. So I think if I had to say core competence, it would be collaborating, working with really smart, interesting people, listening to them, and then processing it through a kind of filter that's about creating places that connect people.
What I think it is the capacity to create a link between the heart of the creator and the eyes of the audience.
That's great. I'll take that.
All right, good. So when you look ahead, you know, what else do you want to do? Because you've done so many things. You think about the Academy Award presentation. There you were. You think about theater. There you are. You think about, you know, TED Talks. There you are. I mean, do you want to create homes? Do you want to create all those things that we traditionally think of architects?
Well,
Or parks or whatever.
I absolutely want to create parks, and I think that I've learned that you can make happen what you want if you pursue it in a way that is true to your point of view. And I think there are certainly building types that intrigue me. We've done a lot of playgrounds, and part of the work in playgrounds has convinced me. I think some of the most interesting work going on in the world is what's happening in parks and public space in New York.
And what is it and why?
Well, I just think the waterfront has been rediscovered. I think public space, the relationship of public and private space, it's a whole new world.
And it's an amazing thing in New York, because New York, for so many years, was looking inward. You
Right.
know? Everything was moved towards inward, towards Fifth Avenue, you
Right.
know, and Central Park,
And in fact,
Broadway.
cut off from the water.
Yeah, and exactly.
Yeah.
You know? And all of a sudden now, in the last 12 years, we've opened ourselves up to this thing that so many cities have flourished.
Yeah.
Whether it's Istanbul or Venice or Paris or whatever.
And I think
A
New
river
York
run through.
I think New York is leading the conversation. Look, I think the High Line is miraculous.
Yeah.
Talk about an intersection of architecture and landscape. So I'm very interested in parks. In the work in playgrounds, which was self-initiated, convinces me that we need to pursue that. One building type, I'll tell you, I think is ripe for major reinvention, and that is stadiums. I think a $1 billion building that's used 15 to 20 days a year no longer makes any sense. So I think if you look at the thought process of merging public-private, you think about how those buildings could be used in other ways. That's hopefully I will get a crack at doing that one of these days.
I am sure you will. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Nice to be
David
here.
Rockwell, an extraordinary opportunity he has, in a sense, to connect us to the, as I said, the mind and the heart of creators and performers and people who somehow stand there in front of us with a huge desire to both entertain, inform, and explain the world that they see. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.